and welcome everyone to GEO, the new rules for brand visibility. I'm Christine Colucci, the CEO of R+M, and I've been a chief member since 2020. I will put my LinkedIn in the chat for everyone, for anyone who wants to connect. And you're in for a real treat today. The session will be led by Edward Baldwin, R+M's strategy practice lead. Yeah. In his day-to-day, Edward works with leadership teams to evaluate the role of brand in organizations to elevate it actually to strategic clarity and revenue advantage. I'm excited for you to meet Edward, really because his background on both the agency and client side means he's been really deep in this day-to-day on growth and what that looks like for B2B organizations. And GEO is definitely something that is threatening that in the near future. But what I do appreciate about Edward's perspective on GEO is he doesn't really approach it from a CEO trend or a technical problem. And he looks at what can really shift, what a shift today really reveals about how buyers are making decisions because of GEO. And he gets how trust is formed, and he talks a lot about that and why organizations are structurally prepared at the leadership level for this change and why some are not. So with that, let me turn it over to Edward. And as I said, you're in for a real treat.
Oh, Christine, thank you for that introduction, and thank you, fellow chiefs, for having me today. I'm usually talking more to marketers, and I've got a version of this that's really kind of about talking marketers down from a ledge, but we're going to have a different conversation today. We're going to have a leadership level conversation because, as Christine mentioned, there's a couple of reasons I don't approach this from an SEO or even a technology perspective, because that's not what I do, not my training. But more importantly, and I think why we're here today is I think the central thing to understand here is as we enter the age of AI search, it is now a leadership issue. And this is maybe going to sound strange at first because, as we know, for a long time, search was a channel problem. It was something marketing handled, something your SEO team optimized for, right? Something we measured in rankings and traffic and conversions. But that's not really what we're talking about anymore. This is not about AI tools because, like I said, that's way out of my wheelhouse. Um, but the question that we're going to explore today is whether your company, your enterprise, shows up when buying decisions are being formed. And what is more of a central leadership question than that? Um, and the reason GEO is important to that is because what's changing right now with this topic is not just about how people search, it's how people choose. It's that they are evaluating earlier. It's they are making their comparisons privately, so where we don't see them typically. They're forming trust and shaping preferences really before your teams have a signal. So we're going to talk, about online visibility, and I'm going to give you um, I will give you an overview of sort of the technical part that'll give you the passing familiarity. Um, but, this is not about getting better at search, right? This is really about understanding for this group today why the system that we've relied on for our online visibility is starting to weaken and what leaders like you are going to need to align before, your brand quietly disappears from the decisions that matter to your buyers. All right, so the uncomfortable part. The easiest way to understand the shift is to treat it like an I'm sorry. Yes, the worst mistake we can make, I should say, is to treat this like an optimization problem, as I mentioned before. It's definitely bigger than that. It is really a structural change about decisions and how they get made. Um, what actually is changing here isn't the funnel, it's whether your brand is included in buying decisions. And again, that has real bottom line impact for everybody here today. Even if, marketers, of course, but also the teams marketers report to and support. For the last 25 years, we've tracked the sales funnel across the website, across our content, across our funnel. We controlled these environments, right? Now everything we're looking at is kind of happening before all of that. It's happening inside your Chat GPT app. If you've played around with that before, a buyer, or more realistically, the whole buying group can ask their questions, and they're getting synthesized answers, and they're aligning on this point of view. And increasingly, the system, by which I mean the AI search, is doing the clicking first. It's doing the clicking for them, right? before you ever see that signal show up. And that is the magnitude of the shift we're talking about, right? The buying stages, kind of as our revenue teams know them and have known them, are sort of being bypassed. In effect, what we're seeing is AI is now having a major influence on your buyer's day one list. And I love talking about buyer's day one list with Christine. We go into that in great depth. Tune in another day for that. But I will not get down that path right now. But kind of taking a step back, if you're not part of that initial consideration, right, you're not part of the deal. And that is not a marketing problem, right? That is a structural gap in your revenue architecture, and it's already happening. Okay. Let's look at this kind of live. And I know it's a little tiny on the screen. This is just an example from a search page. Probably everybody has already seen this. There's really only one thing I want to point out, and we'll get there. But the way that we have always understood our success in an online search has been about ranking, and ranking has changed because it no longer guarantees discovery. If you look way, way down at the bottom of the screen, you see that coveted beachfront top ranked, top organic search result, right? And some very diligent content and SEO team has worked very hard to secure that placement. But look at all the stuff that's in front of it. They built a resort in front of your beach house, right? Your view is blocked, right? The real estate that's really valuable is no longer owned in this little organic search anymore. Um, and again, you look up here that, ranking isn't valuable in its own right, of course. It only matters because it used to correlate to that click, to people getting into our environment that we get to control. But if answers are happening kind of inside the AI interface, which is it over here? It's over there. All the stuff that's happening above that top search result, um, being number one doesn't really mean what it used to, right? And so this is kind of the first crack in the system. Your performance can stay stable, right? All your performance metrics, while visibility kind of declines. And that is, not to be alarmist, what makes this potentially dangerous. Okay, the second crack that starts to appear is in our measurement, because the entire system we've built to understand marketing performance assumes something very specific, that, a buyer's behavior leaves a nice trail for us. We get clicks, we get visits, we get sessions on the site, we get conversions. But when that evaluation is happening in this kind of zero click environment in these AI generated areas, that trail all of a sudden disappears, right? And of course, we can't measure what we can't see, but the decisions are still being made. Commerce is still happening. And this is where, we, and by we, I mean you, have to lead with a change mindset. Okay, here's a little example, right? LinkedIn saw that their share of non-brand B2B traffic dropped by as much as 60%, all while their search rankings held. So, in a traditional SEO sense, nothing broke. But what this reveals is fewer people like needed to click because they were getting what they needed somewhere else. And I think that's a great example of this shift. Their discovery has moved. And when that discovery moves, your visibility moves with it, whether you see it or not, right? So this is real. Real companies are responding to this and taking it seriously. Okay, here's another one. Question for the room. Whose content team has a Reddit comment strategy in their brand book? Show of hands. I'm going to imagine that there are not a lot of hands up. Okay. So this is kind of a mind-blowing graphic, right? We of course tend to think of Google as the center of search and therefore discovery, but AI does not think that way. It is pulling from the entire ecosystem, right? It's pulling from communities like Reddit, like Slack and Discord where they're public. It's pulling from other media, things like PR, articles on trade publications, podcasts, and content platforms like YouTube and LinkedIn. And Google from AI's perspective is just one input. And your brand is built across the entire ecosystem, not just your website. So if visibility is no longer sort of about where you rank, the question we have to answer is what determines whether we show up at all? And I mean, I think the obvious sort of mind-bending reality about this graphic is, of course, Google's monthly visits are still absolutely dominant by, a factor of over 10. But the share that these much lower trafficked sites are getting in terms of how often citations from LLMs are happening is almost inversely proportional. And like that's a literal flipping things on their head. So that's where we are. Okay, so first, the shift is small, right? For most companies, AI-driven traffic is probably about 2% of the total traffic they're seeing today, maybe a little bit more since I pulled that number. It's important because this means this isn't a channel we need to like overinvest in yet or turn the ship around, right? But the risk is an organization ignoring it entirely because it's not visible enough to prioritize yet, right? So the second thing we should understand is it's growing, right? Across the data sets that I've seen most recently, we're seeing anywhere from like 80 to 300% growth month over quarter over quarter, depending on kind of company and category. So again, while the base is still small, the growth velocity is high, and that's usually where strategic advantage shows up, right? Before the trend becomes obvious. Third, the traffic converts at a much higher rate, which is interesting, right? In many cases, up to 3 to 5 times higher than kind of traditional traffic. And that makes sense, right? If we talk about the funnel collapsing and discovery happening on site, by the time someone clicks through from the AI system, they're not just exploring, right? They've already, digested and been synthesized their options. So they're arriving with not just curiosity, but with intent. There's some advantage there. And then, finally, this is the most disruptive. The data that I'm seeing is suggesting that kind of more than half of the cited sources in AI generated answers don't come from the top results in Google. We saw that just a minute ago. And this is proof of the earlier point that visibility is not just a simple extension of ranking, right? We see that in the numbers. You can still be highly ranked and not be included in those AI summaries or in the consumer's day one list. And that's sort of what LinkedIn was facing. Or not highly ranked, and you can still get surfaced, which is the real growth to be won. That's the real opportunity. Um, so what we need to focus on is the signal underneath this data, which is low volume, yes, for now, but high intent and fast growth, and a fundamentally different system for kind of understanding what advantage looks like. All right. So we spent time in the discomfort, right? And the shift in discovery and kind of the metrics that we relied on getting destabilized, turned on their head. This overall sense that control over our brand and our visibility as we've known it is sort of slip. That was necessary. Let's turn the page a little bit and let's start to shift to sort of how we need to get up to speed on what our organizations and our teams need to do. Okay. So we're gonna get a little deeper into the weeds with some core concepts that, are designed for you to take away today. And as I mentioned earlier, but I'm going to put an underline here. The biggest misconception about GEO, right, is that thinking it's Google with different rankings, right? We've talked about that. Um, Essentially, the mechanics are fundamentally different. And the main idea here is that GEO isn't just a technical shift. It's an organizational coherence test, right? It's not a department problem. It is an enterprise problem. Um, what did it used to look like? Search was easy. It used to retrieve information. Now it is synthesizing answers. It's answering questions that you asked, not just giving you content that matches your search terms. Like I said, it kind of the primitive model, for lack of a better word, was search responded to keywords. Now it is interpreting your intent. And you just think of the leap in what that AI agent is doing versus what that search engine was capable of doing. It's mind-boggling, right? Um, and most importantly, it's used to reward rank. And it used to, rank was everything, right? We talked about that. Now we're looking at something different. Now we are looking at selection based on authority. And I will talk more about authority in a moment because that's an important concept for us today. So we need to get our head around this shift. And once we do, everything starts to fall into place. I promise. Okay, so if we step back, the implication is pretty clear. In a GEO environment, advantage doesn't come, kind of just from optimizing faster. It comes from being more coherent and more aligned over time. AI is not just kind of rewarding the most active brands. It's rewarding the most understandable ones, and that's a really different bar for us to be trying to clear. In the old model, performance could kind of happen in kind of piecemeal, right? A page could rank, a campaign could work, marketing could drive outcomes kind of in isolation. Now your organization is being interpreted as a whole across all of your content, across your leadership team, across your products, across your reputation, wherever that shows up. So the real question now is, do all of those signals that are out there that you are emitting constantly reinforce the same idea, or are they competing with each other? Because when they compete, you don't get nuance, you get dilution, right? And dilution does not just reduce visibility, it removes you from consideration. And this is where kind of the organizations are most exposed, as we have seen it. Not because they lack activity or talented people or skilled people, but because they lack alignment at the leadership level. Okay, so, again, we're not making a tactical shift here. It's really a strategy reset. So if all of what I just said is true, if visibility is a function of alignment, then the way we respond to this shift has to change, right? It's not just about optimizing another channel. It's about aligning the entire system that is responsible for your signal because AI doesn't evaluate your organization in parts, right? It reads the pattern that you create over time deliberately or not. What you say, where you show up, how consistently those things reinforce each other. And that pattern determines whether you're included in the result or not included in the result, which is the same as being visible or invisible. That is the shift. What used to be a marketing channel, optimization, is now a leadership challenge, alignment. Because if the system is evaluating the whole, the only way to win, right, is to behave like a whole. And that is a major struggle for any complex or siloed organization. And we see it every day. Okay, next up, if your website isn't the center anymore, something else has to be, right? And it's not your messaging and it's not your design. It's whether your organization is recognizable without your branding, without explanation. Because buyers and AI working on their behalf aren't starting with your homepage anymore. They are encountering these fragments of you, a mention somewhere, a quote, a review, a citation, a recommendation inside somebody else's answer. And from those fragments, AI and customers are forming a judgment. So we have another question to ask ourselves. If someone never visits our website, would they still understand who we are and what we stand for and why we are credible in our space? Because if the answer is no, then you don't have a visibility problem. You have a recognition problem. And that's not something you can fix with a better website. It's something you fix by ensuring that your organization shows up clearly and consistently everywhere that it appears. And we saw in that graph a few slides back, it's appearing in lots of places, or it should be. And strictly, frankly, most organizations are not structured for that. They're not structured for they're not structured for alignment. They're kind of structured for output, right? And that's a problem for us. Okay, so here is sort of the core idea that I'd like for you to take away today. Visibility is no longer something that we can engineer directly, as we sort of used to be able to do. Increasingly, it is going to have to be earned because AI systems are not ranking pages. They are selecting sources, excuse me, and they select those sources based on their model of what credibility is, and ultimately what will be valuable to the users on whose behalf they are working. Those agents, those AI agents are working. Simply put, if you are trusted, you are retrieved. If you are retrieved, you have achieved visibility. So the simplest way to think about this is authority is trust earned over time, right? It's not attention that we can spike with a campaign. It's not visibility that we can buy. Trust has to compound because your organization is showing up consistently and credibly and clearly across everything it does. And to be even more precise, authority isn't even just popularity. It's not reach. It's the confidence that your brand is the reliable source worth including in those AI search results. And this, again, is where organizations struggle. They've optimized for attention, you know, till the cows come home, but they've under invested in the consistency in the structures that are required to earn that trust at scale over time. Okay, so let's dig in a little bit more authority because you hear me sort of talking about customers and AI agents interchangeably, and that's deliberate and hopefully not too confusing. But authority has two sides, and we have to understand that. There's the human authority. Do people trust you? Do they reference you? Do they repeat your point of view? right? This might have been maybe we might have aligned this with kind of user-generated content back in the day. And then on the other side, you have machine authority, right? Does the system recognize you? Are you consistently being associated as an authority on a topic? Do your signals align with the greater ecosystem or represent a clear point of view within that ecosystem? So you need to account for both of these types of authority because AI reflects what the ecosystem kind of already agrees on. And again, this is where authority stops being a marketing conversation and becomes a leadership one, right? Because you can't game it. The LLMs are designed to detect expertise and credibility and consistency by being fed things that are determined to be expert and credible and consistent. So this can't just be a marketing project. It has to be a leadership mandate to own your narrative before the machines define it for you, frankly, right? But the good news is that advantage doesn't come from sort of novelty. It comes from discipline. And that discipline can show up in a few ways, right? Expertise, not activity, clarity. Do we know what we stand for? And do we demonstrate real depth where, in the places we claim to lead? Credibility. Does the market reinforce our story without us having to prompt it, right? Authority strengthens when others say it for you, when others are repeating what you say. Consistency. Do our signals align kind of across the organization or do they compete with each other? Authority starts to erode when, frankly, leadership tolerates contradiction in what these signals are being sent. And finally, freshness. Are we still contributing? Are we actively contributing to the conversation, or are we just sort of relying on past credibility or on our one blue chip report that we publish every year? Authority reflects whether the organization continues to lead, right? And of the things I've shared, none of these are tactics. These are behaviors. These are leadership behaviors. Authority cannot be looked at like a checklist, right? It's your reputation. It is earned over time, and it is visible in the signals that the AI can detect. And that's the shift, right? So I think the bright side and sort of my point of interest here is that GEO fundamentally doesn't change what strong brands already do. It makes the consequences of those choices, of those actions, and of those well-managed brands kind of impossible to ignore in the AI environment, right? Um, and again, this is the part that organizations get wrong. Authority can't just be manufactured inside of marketing. It's the result of how the entire organization behaves, which means it doesn't get solved with a better campaign. It gets solved with alignment. And that makes it, again, a leadership responsibility, which is why we're here today. Okay, so let's get ourselves back on the ground. We've gone through the theory. We've gotten a little bit in the weeds. I've maybe been yelling at you a little bit. Sorry about that. But I'd say my message is this is not a Monday morning reset. You don't need to rebuild your entire organization or abandon what's working, but you do need to shift or consider shifting what you prioritize because the goal is no longer just about capturing attention. It's about earning inclusion in how decisions are being formed. And that doesn't happen through sort of big swings, right? It happens through small, consistent moves, kind of across all the places where your brand shows up, and determining how clearly it shows up and whether those signals are actually reinforcing each other. So, let's make this practical. Um, we're going to sort of look at what to look at, where to focus, and how to start building in your system. I see a question from Courtney. How is Reddit the largest source? This is very silly, but one of the conditions we have to live in because Reddit is most available for the LLMs to be trained on. So we are not operating sort of in strict scientific rigor, right? The LLMs are fed whatever is available to them, and I can't remember if it's in this one or if in my other one, but one of the things that I have to advise content teams, another little tactical play, is any gated content you have on your website, which for a lot of B2B companies that they're using their website to convert, that's like the strategy, right? That's our lead capture. We dangle this valuable report behind a paywall or behind a lead form because that's our best stuff. The AI can't read it, and therefore you're getting no credit for it. So for lack of better, again, some of the major publications like New York Times, Financial Times, The Economist, all those publications that have paywalls are also invisible to AI. So, according to the answer is AI, LLMs are trained on what is available to them. So that becomes another reason we have to consider other parts of this ecosystem. So that's a great question. Hope that was clear. Okay. Um, but we're going to move away from tactics because GEO specifically doesn't reward just better tactics. It rewards better leadership discipline, and that starts with ownership, right? Someone has to own the narrative of the business, not just what we say, but how consistently that truth shows up across kind of everything we do. Because your brand is not expressed in one place anymore, right? It's now being inferred from everywhere you might show up or everywhere somebody is talking about you. And if that narrative shows up in a fragmented way, that fragmentation gets reflected right back to the market. Okay. I think a second shift that's important for us is that uh, we have to exercise discipline over novelty, right? It doesn't come from saying, we don't build our authority by saying we're going to do something new every quarter. It comes from reinforcing the same truth until it becomes recognizable. And again, most organizations undermine themselves here. They chase new messages, new campaigns, new angles, and they keep resetting their signal before it has time to compound, right? And finally, all this requires using brand as a decision system, right? Elevating the role of your brand, not as something kind of layered into your execution, but as the underlying logic that's guiding your decisions across the business, right? Using your brand to answer questions like what do we prioritize? What do we say no to? How do we show up in new channels or with new products or in new markets? Because in a world where your brand is being interpreted constantly, 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 consistency isn't a communications challenge. It is a leadership one. Okay, so now I'm going to take a little bit of the steam off of us because what this data shows is simple, right? Number one, the shifts I'm talking about are not hypothetical. They are already happening, just kind of unevenly. SEO today still drives the majority of traffic, but influence is starting to shift upstream a little bit, right? Into environments where, decisions are happening before that click. And these shifts aren't going to happen kind of in this nice, neat, linear way. They're going to move slowly and then all at once. So I don't think that what we're talking about today is that GEO is going to replace SEO like overnight. It's that we cross the threshold, and most organizations who don't get started are going to realize that has happened too late, which is why our goal, and hopefully what we take away today is the objective shouldn't be to be reactive. It is to get aligned early while the cost of winning, for lack of a better word, is still relatively low. Okay, so when you zoom out, this is what it comes down to. Strong brands that are clear and consistent and credible will continue to show up. Fragmented brands will not. And not because AI has changed kind of the rules of trust. It's because AI is making the existing rules of trust harder for companies to ignore or to avoid, right? The system is now reflecting what the market already believes, right? And that's the part that I think most organizations are going to have to confront. You don't lose visibility because of AI. You lose visibility because there isn't a consistent signal for that AI to find. There's no clear narrative. There's no durable point of view. There's no shared alignment around what the organization should be known for, what problem they solve. So again, as I've said once or twice today, this becomes a leadership choice, right? You can keep treating brand as an expression, right? Something that lives in campaigns and your messaging and your design, or you can elevate brand and treat it as infrastructure. And you can leverage it to be the system that aligns how your whole business shows up everywhere that it matters. Because in this environment, visibility isn't something you kind of generate once. It's not a one and done. It's something you earn, have to keep earning, and something you either reinforce or erode every single day. And again, that's why I would say GEO readiness, which always starts with leadership alignment. And when we do this kind of work for our clients, any type of audit that they want or their request, we always pair that with a readiness study because the data about where you're visible and what you need to do to get visible within these citations is only as good as the enterprise's ability to act on it. So again, we always pair auditing with readiness. So to that end, I've got something special for everybody today. We whipped up a nice little diagnostic. So as I said, there's a theme, as you might have picked up, running through everything we discussed today. And I'll say it one more time that GEO is not a search problem. Ultimately, it is an organizational alignment mandate because AI systems are not evaluating one page, one campaign, or one channel anymore. right? They are evaluating the pattern that your organization creates over time. So in that notion, this QR code will take you to our handy leadership alignment diagnostic. It's just, I think it's 8 questions. You can do it in 5 minutes. It gives you an instant score. And we love this tool for individuals because it just gives them a quick gut check from kind of where they sit, how aligned or not aligned their leadership team might be around some of these key issues, which is a fundamental question to understand if you are asking sort of, are we ready to move into GEO? Are we ready to take this step? Are we structurally equipped to benefit from this? And I think Christine has dropped a link in the chat, which will also take you there in case anyone's having trouble with the QR code. So there you have it. That's what I have to say today. Is that GEO is not just for marketers. It is really something that leadership has to own, and that's the ground to be won.